Night had settled over the Colorado mountains, a thick fog curling through the jagged peaks and valleys, softening the edges of the world. Flames from distant forest fires painted the horizon in shifting shades of orange and crimson, reflecting in the mist like a warning. Evelyn Reed moved with difficulty, each step a struggle, her leg twisted awkwardly from the fall that had thrown her from her horse. Her breath came in ragged gasps, chest rising and falling unevenly as she limped forward, clinging to whatever trees and rocks she could find for support. The forest around her seemed alive with noises that did not belong to any known creature. Shouts echoed from a distance, broken and irregular, the sound bouncing off the mountains in sharp bursts that made her heart pound in her ears. Every shadow seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally in the firelight, and the wind carried with it a smell of smoke, dust, and the faint iron-like tang of blood. Evelyn stumbled over roots hidden beneath the fallen leaves, tears sting in her eyes as she forced herself onward, knowing that without shelter the night could claim her. Pain flared with every movement, her clothing snagging on low-hanging branches, rending her sleeves and scraping her arms. Her mind wavered between the terror of her situation and the stubborn will to survive, each step forward a defiance against the cold, the darkness, and the unknown threats that lurked nearby. Somewhere beyond the immediate shadows, a figure moved with precision, unseen yet intentional. Kyle Morgan had been tracking the faintest glimmers of movement, the irregular flashes that suggested more than animals were stirring in the night. His boots made no sound against the softened ground, and his eyes, trained to catch the slightest flicker of danger, traced the glowing shapes among the trees. He advanced slowly, each movement calculated, every breath measured, keeping his presence hidden while his senses absorbed everything around him. The distant cries reached him, carrying a panic and vulnerability he recognized immediately. The terrain shifted beneath him as he navigated jagged rocks and twisted roots, each careful step bringing him closer to the source. When he crested a low ridge, he found her. Evelyn was slumped against a fallen tree, clothing torn, her hair clinging wetly to her face. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by sudden sharp intakes as she tried to push herself forward. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected both the fear of the unknown and the fierce, unyielding will to survive. Kyle assessed her quickly, noticing the cuts and bruises along her arms, the twisting of her ankle that made every movement a torment. He could see the frost forming on her hair and clothes, the chill of the night biting through what little protection she had left. A quiet determination settled over him, the kind born from years of hunting, surviving, and facing dangers that others would flee from. Without hesitation, he moved closer, careful to avoid startling her further. Each step was deliberate, calculated to convey safety without surprise. When he was within reach, he extended his hand, not to grab or lift, but to offer a choice, a lifeline that depended on her willingness to accept it. She flinched initially, instincts honed by fear, but there was no malice in his approach, only the steady, unwavering presence of someone who understood the fragility of life in these mountains. The night seemed to hold its breath, the forest falling silent as if aware of the importance of the moment. Evelyn's body sagged against the support of the fallen tree, the tension in her muscles loosening just enough for him to see that the immediate danger of collapse was nigh. Kyle knelt beside her, his movements slow, giving her space while offering the assurance of protection. The flames from the distant fires painted their surroundings in a shifting palette of light and shadow, highlighting the stark reality of their isolation. In that silent exchange, the urgency of survival merged with the quiet, unspoken recognition of human connection. Time stretched, each second weighted with potential peril, yet underscored by the instinctive understanding that reaching her, keeping her safe, could mean the difference between life and death. Kyle's eyes scanned the forest beyond, noting the faint signs of disturbance: broken branches, footprints partially obscured by fallen leaves, the subtle shifts that indicated others might be near. Yet he remained rooted in the present, focusing entirely on her, the fragile human form that depended on his intervention. Evelyn's chest heaved, breaths uneven as she tried to straighten her posture. The pain was sharp, radiating from her leg and arms, but the sight of him brought a strange sense of hope she had not allowed herself to feel in hours. The forest held its secrets. The night remained a canvas of shadows and firelight. But in that clearing, two lives intersected with a force that neither could yet understand fully. Kyle adjusted his position, moving closer without intruding, ready to act if a threat emerged, yet patient enough to allow her body and mind to reconcile with the sudden presence of another human being. The distant cries faded into the rustling of leaves, the occasional crackle of branches under small animals' movement, but the tension did not ease. Each heartbeat was a reminder of vulnerability, each breath a negotiation between fear and endurance. Evelyn finally sank fully against the fallen tree, exhaustion overtaking adrenaline, and a subtle shift occurred in the energy between them. The forest, indifferent to human drama, seemed to watch as the first steps toward trust and survival took root in the shadowed clearing. Kyle stayed beside her, a silent guardian, letting the night pass around them while ensuring that the next moments could be met with safety, awareness, and the fragile promise of protection. The mist swirled, carrying with it the scent of pine, smoke, and frost, enveloping them in the stillness of the high mountains. Here, in the harsh isolation of the Colorado night, the faint glimmer of hope began to take hold, a lifeline stretching across the darkness between a wounded woman and the man who chose to intervene. Kyle moved through the forest with careful precision, every step measured to avoid snapping branches or alerting unseen dangers. Evelyn Reed was cradled against his chest, her body tense and trembling, a mixture of pain and disbelief keeping her rigid. The old hunting cabin lay hidden among the dense pines, its wooden walls weathered and darkened by years of exposure to wind and rain. As Kyle set her down inside, the cabin's dim interior offered a quiet refuge from the harsh wilderness outside. The air smelled of aged timber and cold stone, carrying the faint musk of earth and the lingering scent of smoke from past fires. He worked silently, lighting the small hearth with flint and tinder, the sparks illuminating their faces in a warm, flickering glow. He filled a metal cup with water from a nearby stream and placed it carefully within her reach, the motion deliberate and unhurried. A simple meal followed, bread and dried meat, and though her fingers hesitated over the food, the scent of sustenance drew her attention, if only briefly. Kyle kept his movements slow, never forcing proximity, letting his presence become a quiet rhythm that did not demand but simply existed. Daylight filtered through the narrow windows, casting long beams across the wooden floor as they began to tend to the cabin together. Kyle showed her how to mend the roof where leaps had worn thin the boards, hands guiding hers with patience, never overbearing, allowing her to feel capable despite her lingering injuries. They collected water from the stream, moving silently through the underbrush, Evelyn learning to trust the steady cadence of Kyle's steps and the assurance in his eyes. Occasionally, he would disappear into the forest to hunt, returning with game that he prepared carefully, offering sustenance without ceremony, a silent gesture of protection and provision. The days passed slowly, measured by chores and the rhythm of survival, each task binding them together in ways words could not articulate. Evelyn began to notice small consistencies in his behavior, the way he moved without haste, the quiet vigilance in his gaze, the patience that allowed her space to heal. Her fear, once raw and consuming, began to soften, replaced by an awareness that she was no longer entirely alone in the wilderness. She observed him at work, repairing the cabin, preparing meals, and organizing the small store of supplies, and in those moments of observation, something within her shifted. The initial instinct to recoil from every touch or sudden movement gradually yielded to curiosity, a fragile interest growing alongside her tentative trust. Nights were long, the wind rattling the cabin walls and the distant calls of animals carrying on the cold air. Yet the fire's warmth provided a small island of security. Kyle sat near the hearth, keeping watch without pressing his presence upon her, letting her adjust to the idea that not every approach carried danger. As they moved through the days together, each chore, each gesture became a silent conversation, an unspoken dialogue of intent and care. Evelyn's eyes, once wide with apprehension, now lingered on him with a new awareness, noting the quiet strength and measured kindness he exhibited. She began to follow his routines, assisting with repairs, carrying water, and preparing meals, not out of obligation, but because the cabin had become a shared space where her survival and his guidance intersected. The forest outside remained unpredictable, yet within the walls of the cabin, a fragile sense of normalcy began to take shape. Trust, unspoken and delicate, grew in increments, each small action forming a bridge between her solitude and his steadfast presence. As the sun rose and fell over the mountains, casting shifting shadows through the pine trees, Evelyn discovered that she could breathe more freely, that her thoughts could linger on something other than fear. Kyle's quiet consistency, his respect for her boundaries, and the rhythm of survival nurtured a sense of safety she had not known in weeks. Her glances toward him no longer flickered with pure alarm. They held a cautious curiosity, a recognition that this man, alone like herself, offered something rare, a haven, a witness to her pain and the possibility of connection. In that isolated cabin, amidst the scent of pine, the warmth of firelight, and the soft sounds of the wilderness, the slow unfolding of mutual reliance began to define their days. Each shared task, each careful gesture, each silent observation wove a tapestry of unspoken understanding. By the time the stars stretched across the clear Colorado sky, Evelyn could acknowledge that the sharp edges of fear had dulled, replaced by a quiet, growing sense of trust. The wilderness remained vast and uncertain, but within the small wooden walls of the cabin, a fragile bond had begun to form, bridging the distance between solitude and companionship, between wary survival and the beginnings of connection. Weeks had passed since the first night in the cabin, and the rhythm of survival had become familiar, almost meditative. Evelyn and Kyle moved through the forest and around the cabin with a shared awareness, their actions synchronized without needing spoken commands. The scent of pine and damp earth filled their lungs as they collected firewood, carried water, and repaired weathered boards, each task a quiet affirmation of resilience. Shadows lingered in the forest, long and uncertain, and occasionally they would catch the glint of something that did not belong, tracks in the soil that spoke of humans armed and intent, signs that danger still hunted them. Evelyn's eyes would trace the path of movement, her body stiffening with old memories, and Kyle would place a hand near hers, a silent signal that she was not alone.
One evening, as twilight painted the mountains in shades of indigo and amber, Evelyn allowed herself to speak of her past, the fractures and losses that had shaped her, the family who'd abandoned her when she needed them most, leaving her with nothing but survival and mistrust. She spoke in broken, measured tones, recounting moments of fear and pain that had once seemed insurmountable, her hands trembling as they rested on her knees. Kyle listened without interruption, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, revealing a depth of understanding born from his own long years of solitude. He shared pieces of his life too, the quiet ache of loneliness that had marked his days, the struggles with loss, and the way the mountains had both imprisoned and protected him. As the conversation unfolded, the walls they had built around themselves began to thin, replaced by a fragile connection rooted in empathy and shared endurance. Their evenings were no longer merely about tending the fire or preparing for the next day. They became a space where glances lingered longer, where small tentative touches conveyed trust and comfort. Evelyn would brush a strand of hair from her face, and Kyle's hand would hover a moment longer than necessary, a wordless reassurance. The wind whispered through the pines outside, carrying both the scent of distant wildfires and the promise of rain, and inside the cabin, the shadows of the past seemed to recede, if only slightly. The forest beyond remained unpredictable, with its hidden dangers and the occasional unsettling sign of human intrusion, but within the circle of firelight, a quiet understanding took root. Each shared task, each careful gesture, and each long look exchanged in silence became a testament to their growing bond. Nights stretched on with the soft crackle of flames and the rhythmic breathing of two bodies learning to coexist, a gentle dialogue of presence and patience. Trust, once fragile and tentative, began to solidify in the way Evelyn followed Kyle without hesitation, and in the way Kyle adjusted his movements to keep her safe without drawing attention to threats. Their connection was not spoken loudly, it was measured, intimate, and persistent, an unbroken thread woven through the quiet hours of their shared solitude. As stars glimmered across the Colorado sky, reflected faintly in the glass of the cabin window, the forest seemed both endless and protective, a vast expanse that mirrored the complexity of their emerging relationship. In the soft glow of the fire, amidst the creaking timbers and the distant calls of wildlife, Evelyn and Kyle found a rhythm that was their own, a silent, enduring communion born of survival, presence, and the slow, deliberate opening of hearts long guarded against the world.
The night had descended like a velvet shroud over the Colorado forest, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the cabin in near darkness. The quiet was deceptive, a fragile calm that masked the danger creeping closer with each breath of wind. Shadows moved beyond the tree line, indistinct shapes of men armed with intent, circling the cabin with careful precision. Kyle felt the tension tighten in his chest, his instincts sharpening, every muscle attuned to the faintest sound of movement. Evelyn, though still weary from weeks of strain and healing, mirrored his alertness, her eyes scanning the perimeter, pulse quickened, a restless energy thrumming through her veins. When the first faint step of an intruder fell upon the frost-hardened ground, Kyle and Evelyn acted without hesitation, instinct guiding their movements. Kyle's rifle barked once, twice, precise and controlled, forcing the attackers to retreat behind cover. But they were relentless, advancing with measured, dangerous patience. Evelyn, heart hammering, grabbed the closest tool at hand, using it with a courage that surprised even herself, intercepting one of the intruders who had slipped too close. Their actions became a silent dialogue, a choreography born of necessity. Kyle's movements, defensive yet calculated, Evelyn, swift and unpredictable, complementing his strategy in ways that neither had anticipated.
The cabin echoed with the sounds of struggle, the harsh scrape of boots on wooden steps, the metallic clang of a fallen weapon, the muted thud of bodies meeting the earth. And through it all, they remained synchronized, a single force against the encroaching threat. The attackers pressed, testing each opening, probing for weakness, but Kyle anticipated, repositioning quickly, drawing fire away from Evelyn, allowing her to strike with confidence and determination. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as the skirmish intensified, a brutal ballet of survival under the dim glow of lanterns and the intermittent flashes of gunfire. When the final figure fell back, driven off by the precision and daring of their defenders, the forest returned to an uneasy silence. The cabin walls bore the marks of the confrontation, splintered wood, scorched earth beneath the hearth, signs of intrusion that whispered of the violence that had passed. Kyle exhaled, tense shoulders relaxing just slightly as he scanned the surroundings once more. Evelyn, hands trembling but eyes fierce, met his gaze, a mixture of relief and unspoken acknowledgment passing between them. The threat had been repelled, yet both knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The danger lingered beyond the tree line, waiting for the right moment to return. In that charged quiet, the bond between them had deepened, forged in the crucible of shared peril. Trust, once tentative, had hardened into a resilient certainty, each aware that the other could be relied upon without question. The night air was cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and distant fire, yet within the cabin a warmth lingered, born of survival and the intimate knowledge that they had protected one another through sheer courage and instinct. Each glance, each careful movement resonated with the understanding that together they could withstand what lay beyond the shadows, that their connection was now a shield as vital as any weapon, a promise forged silently amid the echoes of conflict. The threat remained, distant but real, yet in that moment, as the moonlight struggled through the clouds, Evelyn and Kyle sat in quiet vigil, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever the forest or the world beyond might bring, their bond now inseparable, tempered by fire, fear, and unwavering courage.
Spring arrived gently in the Colorado mountains, the snow melting into clear streams that wound through the awakening forest. Wildflowers pushed through the softened earth, their colors a promise of new beginnings, while the air carried the scent of pine and damp soil, rich with renewal. Kyle and Evelyn moved through the clearing together, repairing the cabin with careful hands, reinforcing the old wooden fence that had weathered winter's harshness, and planting rows of vegetables in the freshly tilled garden. Each nail hammered, each post set, and each seed pressed into the earth became an unspoken expression of their growing devotion and care for one another. The rhythm of work, the shared effort in rebuilding and nurturing life stitched their days together, forming a tapestry of quiet intimacy. They moved seamlessly in tandem, lifting planks, carrying water from the nearby stream, tending to tools, their bodies communicating trust and understanding where words had yet to form. Evenings were spent near the hearth, the fire crackling softly as shadows danced across the walls, and they sat close, side by side, letting the warmth of the flames mirror the warmth of their hearts. Sometimes they wandered the forest paths together, following deer trails and listening to the murmurs of the streams, the wind rustling through budding branches, feeling the pulse of the mountains beneath their feet. In these moments, they allowed themselves gestures of tenderness, a hand brushing against the other, a shoulder leaned into for comfort, the quiet reassurance that they were no longer alone. Fear of the past, once heavy and looming, diminished with every shared task, every evening by the fire, and every morning that greeted them with sunlight spilling over the peaks. Their love grew steadily, like the forest river that swelled with melted snow, carving its way through the landscape, soft yet persistent, strengthening their hearts and spirits. Each day brought subtle milestones. The first time Evelyn laughed without hesitation while working beside Kyle. The gentle ease of Kyle's guidance as they planted rows of carrots and onions. The quiet satisfaction of a repaired roof or mended fence. Through these acts, they learned the language of each other's hearts, the silent dialogues that spoke more profoundly than words ever could. Trust deepened with every careful movement, every moment of vulnerability shared and respected, and each small victory in rebuilding their home became a testament to resilience, commitment, and the joy of shared purpose. Spring's arrival also brought with it the renewal of the land itself, the forests alive with birdsong, the meadows a tapestry of green and bloom, a mirror to the vitality that blossomed between them. The mountains seemed to watch over them, their steady presence a reminder of endurance and the quiet power of patience, while the river below carried the sounds of the forest and the rhythm of their days, a constant companion to their unfolding story. In the stillness of twilight, as they returned from long walks through the woods, they often lingered on the cabin's porch, hands brushing, fingers lacing, their silence speaking volumes, their gazes meeting with the unspoken affirmation that they had found safety, belonging, and a shared future. Their love, unhurried and patient, grew with the seasons, solidifying a bond forged in hardship and strengthened through mutual care. By the time the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, casting long shadows over the valley, the cabin stood restored, the garden flourishing, the fence strong and true, and within its walls Evelyn and Kyle sat side by side, hearts intertwined, strengthened and prepared for whatever trials the mountains might yet send. The forest whispered around them, leaves trembling in the evening breeze, the river murmuring softly, a lullaby for the life they had chosen to build together, one of quiet love, steadfast devotion, and enduring partnership.
Summer reached its zenith, the sun flooding the Colorado Valley with golden light that shimmered across the forest canopy and the rippling river below. Kyle worked quietly in the workshop behind the cabin, shaping a sturdy wooden chair with careful hands, carving Evelyn's initials into the backrest as a testament to their bond, a symbol of survival, trust, and the love that had grown between them through the trials of spring. The scent of fresh pine mingled with the warmth of sunlight spilling through the open windows, creating an atmosphere of serene anticipation. Neighbors from the nearby settlement began arriving, walking slowly along the narrow dirt path that wound from the village through the flowering meadows, carrying small gifts, handmade fabrics, jars of preserves, and wildflowers tied with twine, their presence humble and respectful of the quiet ceremony that was to come. Birds trilled above in the trees, and the river gurgled softly as though singing a gentle blessing over the gathering, every sound blending with the steady rhythm of their own hearts. Evelyn stepped into the clearing, barefoot on the soft grass, the cotton dress she had sewn herself swaying lightly with the breeze, wildflowers braided through her hair, her posture unguarded yet composed, a woman fully present in her own power and choice. Each step toward Kyle was deliberate, filled with the weight of their shared experiences and the unspoken promises of the life they had built together. Kyle rose from the workbench, his hands slightly rough from weeks of labor, and met her halfway, placing a gentle hand over hers. He took the silver ring he had fashioned from forest branches and locally mined silver, polished until it gleamed in the sun, and slipped it carefully onto her finger, the curve of the metal fitting perfectly like the continuation of their story. Around them, the mountains stood silent and steady. The towering pines swayed softly in the warm breeze, and the river sparkled with sunlight, as if nature itself acknowledged and blessed the bond being formed. Their neighbors watched quietly, smiles restrained, sharing in the joy without overshadowing the intimacy of the moment, the ceremony measured in presence and attention rather than pomp or proclamation.
After the ritual, they moved together to the veranda of the cabin, sitting side by side on the newly crafted chair and the bench Kyle had repaired for the occasion, hands intertwined, fingers laced as if to anchor themselves to each other and the life they had fought to protect. The air was rich with the scents of pine, earth, and the lingering fragrance of wildflowers, mingling with the soft warmth of the afternoon sun. Time seemed to stretch, measured only by the rise and fall of their breath, by the quiet acknowledgement of a love that had endured storms, fear, and uncertainty, now resting in a place of calm certainty. No words were needed. Each glance, each gentle squeeze of the hand conveyed volumes of shared history, triumph, and commitment. Around them, the world seemed still. Every sound, every movement softened into the background of their unity, every shadow and light echoing the journey that had brought them to this moment. In the golden haze of late summer, with mountains embracing them on all sides, river murmuring a steady hymn, and forest whispering through the pines, Kyle and Evelyn sat together, their hearts synchronized, trust and love firmly rooted, the dangers of the past now distant echoes. The sun began its slow descent, bathing the valley in a deeper, richer gold, the air cooling gently, the sky streaked with pink and lavender, as if nature itself was celebrating their union. Their eyes met often, speaking the language of survival, devotion, and the quiet joy of a partnership forged in adversity and nurtured with care. Each breath shared, each hand held, each gentle glance reinforced their bond, turning the ordinary veranda into a sanctuary of enduring love. Past trials, pain, and fear were absorbed into the soil and stone around them, leaving only strength, resilience, and the calm certainty of belonging to one another. The river continued its endless song, the mountains stood sentinel, and the wind carried with it the scent of sage and pine, a silent witness to the life they had chosen to build together, peaceful, steadfast, and full of quiet wonder. They remained there long into the evening, watching the sunlight fade behind the peaks, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Colorado sky, the cabin glowing softly behind them, a haven they had restored and protected. In that golden, hushed moment, everything felt complete, whole and beautifully ordinary, marked by the extraordinary love they had cultivated in silence and action, a love born of trust, courage, and choice. Subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales to experience more stories of quiet, slow-burning love on the Wild West, where every glance, every gesture, and every shared moment carries meaning.